In the heart of Africa, a storm was born a man who turned mercy into weakness and blood into power. He was called Shaka, the cannibal king the beast, who made warriors out of fear and legends out of bones. The sun rose over the wild lands of KwaZulu, a land of endless grass and red dust, where only the strong survived and the weak became forgotten. It was here that a boy was born out of shame. His name was Shaka. His mother was Nandi, a proud woman cast out by her tribe for bearing a child of forbidden love. And the boy grew up knowing only hunger, rejection, and hate. He watched the other children play while he sharpened his anger into a weapon. He was beaten by men who mocked his name and spat on his mother. Yet every insult fed the fire inside him. He learned that pity was poison and love was weakness. When the night fell, he sat beside the dying fire, whispering to himself, "One day they will all kneel, and they will remember my name." Shaka grew in strength. His body became like iron, his mind like the blade of a spear. One day, when the Zulu warriors came raiding his village, he did not hide. He stood and fought barehanded, and the warriors saw in him something that chilled their blood. They took him to their chief, and from that day Shaka was no longer a boy of shame. He was a soldier of destiny. His rage became his teacher. His wounds became his pride. He learned to kill without blinking, to command without question, and to march without fear. The sound of his feet became thunder across the plains. Soon he began to change the ways of war. He broke the old traditions that had ruled for centuries. He made his warriors fight close and silent. No more throwing spears from a distance. They would crush the enemy with the short stabbing blade. The old chiefs laughed at him. They said his ideas were madness. They said no man could change the way of the ancestors. But when Shaka led his first battle, the laughter turned to screams. The ground drank blood until it could drink no more. The enemy was wiped from the earth, and the name Shaka began to spread like smoke across Africa. He taught his men to feel no pain. He would make them walk barefoot over thorns to harden their feet. He would kill those who hesitated to fight and reward those who killed without mercy. The Zulu army became an iron machine driven by one while the drums of war beat through the night, and the stars seemed to tremble at the sound. Yet deep inside Shaka there was still the wound of the child who had been rejected. He wanted not just victory, but fear. He wanted the world to tremble when they heard his name, and so began the legend of the cannibal king of man, who would build an empire from the bones of his enemies, and whose shadow would swallow Africa in blood and thunder. The night was heavy with the weight of sand and silence, and in the deepest heart of the desert stood the hidden temple where no mortal dared to walk. The priests warned that the gods slept there, and whoever entered would wake their wrath. But Pharaoh Akh Maat cared for no warning. He came cloaked in black linen, carrying a torch that burned with oil mixed with the blood of serpents. He looked upon the carvings on the walls where gods of the underworld watched him with eyes of stone and judgment. But the Pharaoh smiled, for he believed no god could chain him to the dust of time. His high priest Hezron followed, trembling, his voice barely a whisper, as he begged, "My king, this place was sealed before even your ancestors drew breath." But Akh Maat turned his burning eyes upon him and said, "I am the son of Ari. No curse can touch me, no god can deny me eternal life." And so he pressed his palm against a sacred door carved with the symbols of Anubis and Thoth, and as it opened, the air grew colder than death itself. Inside the chamber there was no sound, only the flicker of the flame and the smell of centuries of dust. The walls shimmered with gold and obsidian, and at the center stood a coffin, not of wood, but a black stone older than the pyramids. It was said to hold the secret that Osiris himself had hidden from men, the secret of walking between worlds. Akh Maat stepped closer to his heart, pounding not with fear, but hunger for eternity. He ordered his guards to open it, and when they hesitated, he shouted, "You serve a god who bleeds. Open it or bleed yourselves." The lid moved with a sound like thunder, and from within rose a darkness, not of this earth. The torchlight bent around it, as if swallowed by night. A whisper filled the room, not from one mouth, but from 1,000 voices, saying, "Pharaoh, you seek what the living cannot hold." He froze, as shadows wrapped around his feet, like snakes. He heard the voice again, "You will have life everlasting, but not as you dream." The high priest fell to his knees, begging the Pharaoh to close the coffin, but Akh Maat laughed and reached inside to touch the black heart of eternity. And in that instant his body trembled. The torch went out, and a cry echoed to the temple like the scream of the dying sun. When the light returned, the Pharaoh stood still, eyes wide and lips smiling. Yet his skin was pale as the moon. He turned slowly and said, "I have seen beyond death, and I have conquered it." The priest looked into his eyes and saw something that was not human anymore, something vast and empty. The Pharaoh walked past him, his footsteps leaving no sound, and his shadow no longer followed behind him. As they left the temple, the desert wind rose howling, as if the earth itself mourned for what had been unleashed. That night the stars are behind clouds, and the Nile ran dark. The priest of Ra spoke of an omen of birth of a king whose heart no longer beat with life, yet could not die. Akh Maat sat upon his throne silent, his gaze lost in the horizon where the sands met the sky. He no longer slept, nor ate, nor felt pain. He had what he desired, but in his palace whispers began to grow. Servants said he wandered the halls at midnight, speaking to the walls and sometimes to something unseen. Days turned to months, and his people began to fear him. The crops withered, the rivers slowed, the temples stood empty, for the gods had turned their faces away from Egypt, and all who served the Pharaoh began to dream the same dream of black sun rising over a land of dust and bones. A high priest wept, knowing the curse had begun, but it was too late for the king, who tried to cheat death. The sun rose over the desert, yet its light could no longer touch the palace of Akh Maat. The once golden walls now seemed to drink the light. Instead of reflecting it, the people whispered that the Pharaoh had become a shadow, that the gods had abandoned his throne, and the land itself had begun to rot from within. The air grew thick, and still as if time had stopped obeying its laws, the great king sat upon his throne, his crown crooked, his eyes burning like dying embers, and his voice was no longer the voice of a man. He called upon his priests, demanding offerings not to gods, but to himself. He said, I am beyond Ra, I am eternal. Let my name be carved upon the stars. His words echoed to the halls like thunder, yet none dared to answer. Those who spoke against him were never seen again. The guards said they heard screams in the night, followed by whispers in a language not this earth. The high priest Hezron watched helplessly, his heart breaking for the man. He once served the Pharaoh, no longer ate food, nor drank water. Yet he did not die. He wandered the palace at midnight, muttering of dreams, where he stood before a river of fire, and voices begged him to cross. He spoke of shadows that followed him, though no one else could see them, and sometimes he laughed to himself as if speaking to invisible gods. One evening the Pharaoh gathered his council. He stood tall, though his flesh had grown pale and dry like parchment. He said, tonight I will summon the spirit of Osiris himself. I will command the god of the dead to bow before me. The priests fell to their knees, crying that such a thing was forbidden, but the Pharaoh silenced them with a glance, his eyes empty of mercy. He raised a staff carved from black stone and spoke words that twisted the air itself. The torches dimmed the walls, trembled, and the sky outside turned crimson. Lightning struck the temple of Ra, and the idols shattered. In an instant the earth opened, and a wind colder than death swept through the throne room. From the darkness came a voice so vast that it seemed to come from every corner of the world. It said, Akh Maat, king of flesh, you have touched what no man should, and now the curse of the undying shall be fulfilled. The Pharaoh fell to his knees, his crown rolling across the floor. He shouted, I am not afraid, I am your equal. But the voice only laughed and said, you are eternal, yes, but you shall never rest nor rule, nor be remembered. And then silence filled the room again. When the priests looked up, the Pharaoh was gone. They searched the palace for days, yet no trace of him could be found. His throne stood empty, his reflection vanished from mirrors, his name erased from temple walls. As if the gods themselves had wiped him from memory, the high priest ordered the gates sealed and the palace abandoned for fear that his spirit still walked within. Years passed, and Egypt began to heal. The Nile flowed again, and the people returned to the temples. But strange tales spread among travelers of a figure wandering the dunes under the moonlight, a man without a shadow, whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. They said he whispered to the sand, and the sand whispered back. They said he searched endlessly for his name. The legend of the cursed Pharaoh grew across generations, but no one dared speak his name aloud for fear it would call him forth again. In secret, the priests recorded his story on black papyrus, sealing it deep within the catacombs. It was said that whoever read his name aloud would awaken his spirit once more. And so the tale of Akh Maat became a warning carved in silence to all who sought to cheat death, for the gods may grant eternal life, but never eternal peace, for some eternity is not a gift but a prison. Deep beneath the desert, beneath the shifting sands, of Pharaoh still walks between life and death, his eyes empty, his soul unending, his heart beating not for glory but for punishment for the curse he called upon himself will never fade as long as the wind still whispers to the dunes of Egypt. The desert had swallowed kingdoms and buried empires, but it could not hide its secrets forever. In a year, when the great storm struck, the Sahara, a group of archaeologists discovered something that no map recorded: a black stone door half buried beneath the dunes, marked with symbols that no one could translate. The leader of the team, Dr. Elias Ward, believed it was the tomb of a forgotten dynasty. He had spent his life searching for the truth behind the legend of the king who defied death. The wind howled as they cleared the entrance, the air heavy with dust and silence. Strange carvings appeared on the walls, showing a man standing before the gods, his face erased by time. Beneath the carvings was a single line written in an unknown script. Elias whispered his assistant. It says, "The one who opens this door will meet the undying." For a moment no one moved, then curiosity triumphed over fear, and they broke the ancient seal. A sound like thunder echoed through the dunes. The air turned cold, the torches flickered and went out when the lights returned. The walls seemed to breathe as if alive, and a faint whisper filled the chamber. It was not the wind, it spoke words none could understand, but every man there felt them inside his mind. They descended deeper, finding a vast hall filled with golden statues. Their eyes, made of onyx, staring like living watchers. In the center stood a sarcophagus carved from black stone, larger than any they had seen before, its lid etched with symbols that glowed faintly. When the light touched them, Elias felt drawn to it, his hands shaking as he brushed away the sand. He whispered, "This must be him, the lost pharaoh of the forbidden dynasty." The moment his fingers touched the stone, the ground trembled. A low hum filled the air, and the glow grew brighter. Suddenly the carvings began to move, shifting like liquid, forming words in a voice that echoed from within the tomb. The voice said, "You have broken the silence of eternity, and the curse of Akh Maat shall rise again." The team screamed as the sarcophagus cracked down the middle, and darkness poured out like smoke. The temperature dropped so low their breath turned to mist. Shadows spread across the floor, and from the center of that darkness a figure began to rise, its shape human, yet not flesh, its eyes burning like dying stars. It spoke, not with sound, but inside their minds. "You seek knowledge, you seek power. I sought the same, and I found only endless night." One by one the lights went out. Only the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. When the sun rose the next morning, the desert was calm again. The camp was empty, their tents torn apart, and the entrance to the tomb had sealed itself as if the sand had never been disturbed. Only one thing remained, a recording device half buried in the sand, playing a final message of Dr. Elias Ward. The voice trembled as he spoke. "We found him. He was real. The curse is real. The walls move, the statues watch us. If anyone finds this, do not enter. He never died. He never left. His name must remain forgotten." Then static filled the tape, and it ended. Years later, a government excavation team arrived at the site. They found no bodies, only footprints leading into the dunes that stopped abruptly, as if the people had vanished into the air. The team sealed the area, declaring it off limits. But satellite images later showed faint lights beneath the sand, moving slowly like a heartbeat. Scholars debated the tale. Some called it superstition. Others said it was ancient technology. Yet those who studied the recordings reported hearing whispers in their sleep. Some claimed to see a man in their dreams, a tall figure, wearing a broken crown, his eyes glowing faintly as he whispered, "Remember my name." The curse of Akh Maat lived on through those who dared to speak it. It was said that every 100 years the wind over Egypt carried his whisper across the desert, searching for those who disturbed his rest. And when the storm rose over the Nile, his spirit walked again, unseen and eternal. Even now, beneath the shifting sands, beneath centuries of silence, the cursed Pharaoh waits, his black sarcophagus, open his spirit, wandering forever between worlds, punished by the gods he defied for eternity. Is not glory, is the endless night of the undying.